they just scheduled it wrong because it was definitely said 6 Eastern on all the graphics and such. So let some folks get in here and see what we're about today. Hopefully I'm not too loud. Finally got a cord to make my microphone not just cut out on me too, which is nice. I realized it was my cord's fault. I thought it was my mic being old and shit. But
I feel like it more often than not is the cord.
Yeah. Then I'll keep running through these overlays. Let's see. D-Hop, Merrill Hodge, worst QBs, video, biggest bus, fantasy situations. That'll be a fun one.
Yeah, looking at some of those depth charts, disgusting.
Yeah, it's
disgusting.
It's going to be really interesting how things like pan out after the draft is over, because like I want to see which of these depth charts is still gross, and then like which teams are going to try and add Kareem Hunt, or like
I didn't realize Jerick McKinnon is a free agent. Like I didn't know that until today. He's not signed.
Yeah, no, there's like quality players that are still out there, and then like is Lamar Jackson going to be, you know, as much as he's probably staying in Baltimore at this point, is he going to be pursued once teams miss out on their quarterback if they do in the draft, like the Colts or something like that? Because at this point, I feel like the Colts are probably going to end up with Stroud. So I don't know.
Yeah, the Texans are also going very cryptic teenage girl on us.
The Texans should trade for Lamar. That's what they should do. Of all, like, that's not a place that Lamar would probably want to go, but like that's a spot that just it makes actually a lot of sense.
I'm a big DeMeco Ryans guy. I believe in what they've got going on there.
Yeah, I do too, and I think that's why it's like so the thing with them not taking Stroud, obviously the whole agent thing, and I'm like, okay, you can try and just take a quarterback next year, but there's no guarantee that your quarterback next year, or that your team is going to be bad enough to get you the number one pick. Like this team is going to be trying to win games as much as they might not be equipped to do it. Like DeMeco Ryans and whoever you end up throwing out there is going to be trying to win games. All right, looks like we got a little handful of people in here. What's up, guys? This is kind of the podcast pre-show. We'll take a few minutes here to answer any questions if you guys have them, but we are going to be going over a lot of stuff during the podcast itself, which we will kind of, you know, soft launch after any questions that we get in here. We'll do a little animation, then we'll get into it. But yeah, Pat and I, if you kind of hopped in the middle of it, we're just talking a little bit about the NFL draft QB situations and how things are shaping out. It looks like the Panthers are probably going to take Bryce Young first overall, which is just complicating things for the Texans, who have been talked about as not being a fit for CJ Stroud because of him sharing an agent with Deshaun Watson. And, you know, some people may think that that's kind of blowing it out of proportion. I don't. If you look up David Mulugeta, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If you look up his clients, he has literally no clients who are members of the Houston Texans, and he has about 40 clients on his list. You know, not that means he would never send a client to the Texans. Obviously, he has a couple of unsigned clients as well, as any agent would, and I'm sure if the Texans were the only team to offer, yeah, you know, he's going to negotiate with them. But with we've seen this happen before, where quarterbacks near the top of the draft, them and their agents try to, you know, finagle their way to the team that they prefer, and it seems like.
See, I wonder, like, it's been such a long time since like the whole Eli Manning thing, where he was just flat out like, "No, I'm not going to your team." Like, I would wonder if anyone would be willing to do that. Like, there hasn't even really been any like threats of that in a long time.
I think a lot of them are maybe not made public too, but it's like this is how drafts work, right? Like the worst teams are going to be the ones with the top picks. It's very rare that you get a team that's like, okay, we can tell this team is clearly heading in the right direction, which we kind of do have with the Panthers this year. But it's like there's going to be bad teams at the top of the draft. Just refusing to go there is just interesting. All right, it looks like we're not getting any questions in here, so I think we can just kind of kick off with our topics. So let me get our animation rolling, and then we will start the show. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Off the Bench. I am Brandon Carney alongside Patrice Gustafson, actually named Patrick. I don't know. Patrice would be a terrible name for you, to be honest.
I don't have the looks for that.
No, not quite. We are back. Plenty of NFL news to talk about. Honestly, that's going to be the vast majority, pretty much the entirety of the podcast. We are getting to that point as we draw closer to the NFL draft, where there is plenty more content to talk about and go through with the NFL. But Pat, the biggest news of the day that dropped on the day we are recording this podcast: Jalen Hurts agrees to a 5-year, $255 million extension, becoming the highest paid quarterback in the NFL today in NFL history based on average annual value. Shout out to Jalen Hurts. I have loved watching his progression since coming out of college. He's a guy I believed heavily in, just seeing his attitude and his work ethic and his skill set. He's a guy that I can't say I ever predicted would be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, but a guy that I really believed could reach that tier of, at least top 10 guy, and he has vastly surpassed that. And now he's getting rewarded in the way of a gigantic paycheck. Get that Brinks truck to this man's house. Pat, how are you feeling about the Jalen Hurts extension and his future with the Eagles?
Yeah, like you said, too, even after year one, they showed a lot of strong glimpses, but he wasn't throwing the ball a lot. He was really a run-first guy. People were questioning it. Like, people were saying, Gardner Minshew, and they kind of pulled him in that last game in a clear, sabotage effort, it seemed.
Yeah.
There was clear sabotaging of the Giants. Was that Nate Sudfeld?
That was Nate Sudfeld, I believe, yes.
So, then there was that, and there was just a lot of question marks going into last year, and he just silenced them like I've never seen anyone silence the doubters before. He still has a lot of room to grow throwing, but that's a great offense. It's a great system under Nick Sirianni, and obviously the highest paid guy in the league isn't necessarily the best guy in the league, as we've seen many, many times, but he certainly deserves it. And even once these other guys get paid, he deserves to be in that top echelon.
Yeah, the highest paid guy is almost always just the most recently paid, top 10-ish quarterback. Basically, any guy in there who's due for a contract is going to reset the market. If you look at actually the top highest paid quarterbacks in average annual value right now, it's kind of a wacky list. It's like Jalen Hurts on top, and then right after him, there's Aaron Rodgers, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, and then Mahomes is, I think, fifth, despite Mahomes being signed for a much longer term, the $500 million man. But yeah, I think Jalen Hurts still deserves this money, and he's probably going to be surpassed whenever Joe Burrow signs his extension, maybe even Justin Herbert. I don't know where the market stands with Herbert as opposed to Hurts, but Lamar Jackson too. Yeah, Lamar Jackson could surpass this if and when he ever gets signed or traded or whatever is going to happen with him. But I don't know. They got Odell Beckham coming off the 2 ACLs. I can't imagine why he would leave now. I mean, it's just the ideal situation in Baltimore. So,
and I'm curious as to how this is going to impact Lamar's market, because it's similar guaranteed money. What Hurts is getting, $179 million guaranteed. Lamar has asked for $175, though it would kick to $200 with some non-injury incentives. But I think the fact of the matter is just that I think it's more so what's scaring some of these owners is just the fully guaranteed notion. Whether or not it's actually more money or not. But I don't think these teams want to fully commit to a fully guaranteed kind of guy, especially with Lamar's injury history. But I think this will definitely open the door for Lamar to get a similar deal.
Yeah, I think news has gone kind of back and forth, the rumors of how much guaranteed money Lamar Jackson's been asking for. But as you just said, Adam Schefter retweeting the terms of what Lamar has been off as opposed to what Hurts got today. And it's a very similar deal. Lamar was, total value was Hurts $255, Jackson $250. Total guaranteed money was Hurts $179 million, Jackson $175. And, now with this deal, Jackson's probably going to want his deal to at least exceed Jalen Hurts's because, again, resetting markets. But I think this is an understandable benchmark for where this contract needs to be. You've got Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, two guys. Lamar's won an MVP. Jalen Hurts has been damn close this past year. Arguably, you could have argued that he could have won it. But Jalen Hurts has also been to a Super Bowl. So it's two guys who are on very, very similar tiers in terms of quarterbacks, and their contracts should borderline match each other. And I don't know if Jalen Hurts agreeing to this deal will help Lamar's negotiations get back up off the ground, but it at least gives us something to point to be like, look, if Lamar's turning down something that's If we get reports that he's been offered something a little more than what Jalen's got and he's still not accepting it, then we can kind of raise our eyebrows a little bit more. But this is about Jalen Hurts. Congrats to him. The Eagles have their quarterback of the present and future locked down. Him and the A.J. Brown connection and, Dallas Goedert, Devonta Smith. That is a hell of an offense to, lock in here for years to come. And the Eagles, I think, are going to be perennial Super Bowl contenders. My personal pick to finish the job this upcoming season. The other big news that we had come out a few days ago, Also in the NFC East, finally, the Washington Commanders are going to be sold to a group led by Josh Harris. It is an utter miracle that this man is out of our lives. Dan Snyder.
In peace, bozo.
Oh, dude, Dan Snyder is just such a disaster of a human being. I made an entire video on it last week about just some of the things that he's done in his tenure, leading the Commanders. Trying to sue a 73-year-old woman who couldn't pay her season tickets, even though she'd been holding season tickets since 1960. He tried to he did take down like a bunch of trees that were like nationally protected just because he wanted a better view of the Potomac River. This guy, so many things, and then this is not even talking about the name change nonsense that we went through. And look, no matter what you think of the Redskins name, whether you think it was racist or just in bad taste, whatever it was, the fact that he went so long just dismissing it and not even trying to entertain it, just no sensitivity whatsoever to anybody who may have felt slighted by it. The guy's a bum. The guy's a bad guy. Sexual assault allegations and, hush money payments. A bad dude, and it's a good day when he gets out of the NFL.
Yeah, even going back to the name change, that was just pure defiance in the name of defiance at that point, where he was just like, you guys want me to do this, I'm not going to do this. And you look at, that stadium is terrible with like the sewage leaks and all these other.
They almost killed Jalen Hurts. Tried to fall apart on him.
When that bleacher kind of fell on top of him. Yeah,
we're lucky Hurts got to this extension in one piece.
Yeah, and you mentioned the sexual assault allegations and that whole investigation where we have still gotten nothing from the league, and then the whole, I believe, Congress was trying to question him for withholding funds or something, and then obviously the whole debacle with John Gruden and Bruce Allen. Obviously there's more there on Washington's behalf, so And it's just a bad organization. They're just never good. Oh, and then the Sean Taylor statue. Good Lord.
Oh man, how could I forget? It just goes to show you how many things he's done wrong that will fall by the wayside.
That's you asked a couple weeks ago, are the Cardinals the most incompetent franchise? And no.
You're right. I forgot.
It's almost like the Commanders don't even count almost, because it's such a given that they are the most incompetent franchise.
They're a tier of their own.
But so. Let's hope they can turn the page there. They've got a very devoted fan base, and, they have an okay-looking team. Obviously, their quarterback play will be the biggest decider on how competitive they'll be in the next few years. But, just for those fans' sake and everyone's sake, let's get this guy out of our memory, just like we did with Donald Sterling, and just get this guy out of here as soon as possible. Good riddance.
Yeah, you mentioned, the investigation with the sexual assault. The Commanders were fined $10 million after there was wrongdoing found just up and down the organization. One of the things that I remember that stood out to me was Snyder apparently asked a member of the video production team to cut together a highlight reel of basically the most lewd footage from a cheerleader photo shoot that they did, basically the parts where they were the most exposed. And he wanted it titled The Good Bits. So he's disgusting.
Oh, man.
You've got that, and then you mentioned the withholding funds. Yeah, he was misreporting ticket revenue so that he could keep more of it for himself and keep it away from funds that were supposed to, go toward visiting teams or visiting locker rooms or accommodations and such. So yeah, just a bad guy, a liar,
a cartoonish villain.
Yeah, legitimately.
Mr. Burns would be proud. Seriously.
No, it's one of those guys that you feel like just can't possibly be a real person the more and more you read about him, and then it's like, oh, he is. And yeah, the Sean Taylor statue, I talked about that on the pod with Maddie during the season. It's just they couldn't even get such a minuscule thing right. Of course, honoring Sean Taylor is a big deal and something you need to take seriously, but it's really not that hard to do. You build the guy a nice statue and you have it around your facility or around your stadium forever, and it's a nice way to remember the guy. Instead, you put up one of those things that looks like it's showing off a new uniform. There was no body with the thing. It was a mannequin. It's awful.
And it was such a cop-out. Same thing when they retired his number. It was controversy, Sean Taylor. Which is just disrespectful in the sense that we're just going to use this guy to get us out of trouble, and yeah, it's just a miserable man and franchise.
Finally out of our lives to the tune of $6 billion. Look, Dan, you can go ahead and be rich, go to your island, just as long as you're out of my life. I don't really care. I really don't care what you do with your time
Congrats
anymore.
On the years of mispractice and worse. Here's $6 billion for your troubles.
Yeah, go ahead and sleep on that at night, pal. Even though you are just an absolute debacle disaster of a human being. I guess everybody named Dan Snyder's a bad person because the Nickelodeon guy was named Dan. I think Dan Snyder as well. That just kind of terrorized Nickelodeon
Schneider,
for years.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan Schneider. So similar enough.
For that one. Sorry.
Yeah,
Don't come after us, Nickelodeon.
Yeah, if any of you have kids out there or planning to have kids and name them Dan, just do not have their middle name be Snyder or Schneider because you're setting them up to be pretty bad people. All right, moving on. Buda Baker requesting a trade from the Arizona Cardinals. Pat, this one did not really surprise me a ton because this is a good player looking to make the most out of his career, and you've got a team like the Cardinals that are just trending like the Titanic right now, slowly sinking, a team that needs to hit rock bottom before they bounce back up, and I predict that rock bottom is going to be this upcoming season. So Buda Baker, not surprised that he wants out.
What are you talking about? They just signed Jeff Driscoll today.
You're right. I forgot. They're going 14-3. My bad.
The biggest thing that took me aback looking at this, that Buda Baker's only 27. Like, he's only been in the league for 6 seasons. Like, he's a guy that I assume was like low 30s, like guy that's been in the league for a decade. That's the biggest thing that struck me when I was reading about it. I was like, this guy's only 27. And, I feel like he's a guy that any team could really afford to improve their secondary. And you're looking at a guy who's an elite tackler, can get some sacks coming from the secondary, and $16 million cap hit. He has a team option next year for upwards of 18. It's lofty for a safety, but this is a really good player, and I think this is kind of going to be a situation like Fool's Gold. Like, this is going to be a team that's already pretty good, that probably, if you look on paper, probably doesn't need Buda Baker, but they'll go get him just for the sake of it. A team that I've seen a lot of people is the Dolphins, saying like, they're in the win now situation. They might not necessarily need him.
Throw him with Jalen Ramsey out there.
This is the kind of guy that puts you over the edge.
Yeah, I agree. I just think the worst is absolutely yet to come for the Arizona Cardinals. Hiring new head coach Jonathan Gannon from the Eagles, that's a step potentially in the right direction. The only thing that throws me off about him, and I didn't realize what he looked like until the other day, he looks like Murr from Impractical Jokers.
Yes, yeah.
And that makes me incredibly uncomfortable. I just kept seeing.
Guy.
No, I saw a joke that was like these punishments for Impractical Jokers are getting out of hand. Like, all right, Murr, now go coach the Arizona Cardinals and trade Buda Baker. Like, oh god,
I'll start Jeff Driscoll.
Right, start Jeff Driscoll. Tell everyone Kyler Murray's hurt and just win 1.5 games all year. To be honest, I would not be surprised if 1.5 is kind of the way they're headed. Maybe what would that record be? 1-15-1 with the 17-game schedule. Yeah, I get a little tie in there. I do think the Cardinals are going to be in contention for one of the worst teams in football next year. They'll be in the hunt for Caleb Williams or Drake May should they decide to move on from Kyler, which it seems like things are trending toward happening. But yeah, Buda Baker, I don't blame you, man. Get your ass out of there because that is just not where you want to be. And a little fun fact for our viewers, Buda Baker's real first name is not Buda, as you might be surprised to know. It's Bichard. So just leaving you with a little fun fact there on Buda Baker.
Buda would have been better, honestly. But
I mean, yeah, Buda's a better name. I think that's why he chose it. But either way, Bichard, interesting enough. All right. Speaking of the top of this upcoming draft, we've got the Cardinals sitting at number 3, and then you've got the Colts sitting at number 4. Jim Irsay is tweeting about the Colts' potential options at quarterback. In a very Magic Johnson-y type of way that kind of confused the hell out of me. So here's the tweet if you haven't heard it or seen it. For the 23 draft, we have many options. With the number 4 pick, we could stay put and take a QB, or trade up and take a QB, or trade down and maybe take a QB, or not. All options on the table, but we like our position and are very excited. Fire up. This just reads like the drunkest of drunk tweets I've ever seen of him just thinking about the draft's coming up. I gotta fire off a tweet to hype up our people out there. Like, here's all the things we could do, guys. Get excited. We're gonna make a decision when the draft gets here. So I don't know.
Yeah, and Jim Irsay is I like Jim Irsay because of how engaging he is. Like, you don't see any of these owners being as kind of like open, and all these guys are these stuffy old rich guys who keep everything close to the chest. This guy just doesn't care. I mean, this is such a troll move, but it's like such an unnecessary troll move, and that's what makes it so funny. And like, what if they do not like what is the possible situation? Like,
let's see, trade down and maybe take a QB. He kind of covered all the bases.
Yeah, I guess not. Like, what does or not mean? Like, does that mean like they stay at 4 and take Will Anderson? Like, what are the,
one of
would
one of
that
the
fall
only
under this tweet?
one of the only options he didn't list would be trade up and not take a QB, which that's the funniest outcome of all of these easily. Like trade up to number 2 somehow with the division rival Texans, who I imagine aren't even going to pick up the phone, but then do that and just take Tyree Wilson or something at 2. Like that would be incredible content. Not going to happen. But look, if Jim Irsay is in the same mental state that he was when he fired off this tweet, maybe he would pull something like that. Although I guess he's not actually the GM, so I don't know if he has that power. But he does if he really wants to make it happen as the owner. So I don't know. Jim Irsay is kind of like a cracked out Jerry Jones that just knows how to use Twitter better. It's like these are the only owners who are so outwardly in the public eye. I guess Robert Kraft as well, but just he's kind of more neutral of a person. But Irsay and Jerry Jones, I kind of just want to see those two like locker box or something on pay-per-view. I don't know.
Like, how many owners? Obviously, we can probably name them, but like how many owners realistically can you like name off the top of your head? Probably not a ton. Probably like maybe a dozen. But like, Jim
man,
Irsay,
that's pushing it.
When you're listing out Jim Irsay. Probably, I would say Jim Irsay would probably be the second or third owner behind Jerry Jones and I don't know, maybe Arthur Blank. I don't know, Arthur.
If you're naming Arthur Blank before Jim Irsay, I don't know where your head's at.
I don't know, but yeah.
Jim Irsay is a very weird guy, but look, it's going to be an interesting decision that the Colts have to make on draft day, Pat. I feel like we might as well cover this a little bit with kind of where the quarterback situation is heading. So it's sounding more and more like, and this is, again, snip, snap every week, but it sounds more and more like Bryce Young may end up being the pick here at number 1. Supposedly the Panthers are, taking into account this sort of intelligence test that the NFL had, and Bryce Young scored very, very well on it. CJ Stroud not as well. It's not a make or break test, but it's something that Panthers owner David Tepper very highly values, so it could, be the ultimate swing. And look, Bryce Young, I think most people agreed was the best player coming in, best quarterback coming into this draft. It was just a matter of the measurables, right? That was the only question mark. But looks like the Panthers might be settling on Bryce Young, and it creates kind of a confusing domino effect that we don't know what's going to happen now, because CJ Stroud shares an agent with Deshaun Watson, who that agent may be advising Stroud or pushing for Stroud to not go to the Houston Texans. David Mulugeta has 40 plus clients in the NFL, none of whom are members of the Houston Texans anymore. And this Deshaun thing probably really soured their relationship, regardless of who was in the right. It was the Texans who were in the right. But anyway, he's not going to want to deal with them again, is the thinking. So the Texans, rumors are getting louder and louder that they may not even take a quarterback at number 2. They may either take a position player or trade down altogether. I personally feel like this is how the quarterbacks are going to shake out now. We've got Bryce Young going at number 1. We've got the Texans taking their best defensive player available at 2, be it Tyree Wilson or whoever it may be. And then I think we're going to have CJ Stroud end up as a Colt, whether they have to trade up one spot with the Cardinals to do that, I don't know, but I think Stroud ends up a Colt. I think Anthony Richardson ends up a Seahawk. I've talked about that fit a few times. And Pat, you're going to hate when I say this, I think Will Levis ends up a Raider. I see it based on my thinking up to Levis. I think Levis will end up either a Raider or maybe a Titan, but I'm leaning Raider right now. It just feels right to me. And it's funny. We've went from, potentially 4 straight quarterbacks in the first 4 picks in certain mocks, and now it's like they're kind of getting dotted all over the place. So
that's I was looking at a few mocks today, and one of them was like 1, 2, 3, 4. The top 4 quarterbacks gone. Mm-hmm. And then I saw others where there were 2 in the top 10, where they had Richardson and Levis not even going in the top 10. And then obviously there was a report today too that there are like 5 teams that don't even have a first round grade on Richardson and Levis. Damn. So that just goes to show the level of fluctuation these teams feel about them. But just from the Raiders' perspective, I would hope not, just because you're going to get a choice of offensive tackles. They will probably be in the position to be the first team to take a tackle, or you could get Devon Witherspoon or maybe Christian Gonzalez. Even that would be ideal, or Jalen Carter or Tyree Wilson. With the possibility of these quarterbacks all going early, there's going to be a lot of options there regardless. So if there's only 1 quarterback left at 7 and 3 are gone, they cannot take Will Levis. They have so many other needs, they cannot do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this just all breaks down so poorly for the Texans that it's like I feel bad for them. They are still just suffering from all that went down with Deshaun Watson, and it's like now it's going to prevent them potentially from getting, the clear second or maybe even first best quarterback in this draft, and they may have to go another year without an answer at that position. I cannot picture a 2023 season for the Houston Texans where they throw Davis Mills out there again at quarterback. So I don't know who the answer is going to be. Could you see that happening?
Yeah.
Really?
Just because,
okay.
Again, they're another team that has so many needs. So, like, if you could go out there and get a Will Anderson or Christian Gonzalez or something like that and suck again, and then get, maybe they just like Caleb Williams or Drake May better. Honestly, I like Caleb Williams better than anyone in this draft. But then again, then you're banking on being the worst team in the league next year. So it's just like, they have a chance with the second and the 12th. They could get two really good non-quarterbacks to help fill out the team and base their future and say, you know what, Davis, you kind of stink, but we're just going to roll with you. When I read about this today, I thought that, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough bet because I'm with you. Caleb Williams, I think, is easily the best quarterback of this class and the next class if you were to combine the two. And then you've got Drake May in there as well, who could very well be the second best of those two. We have to let this college football season play out before we make that definitive statement. But either way, Caleb Williams is the generational Patrick Mahomes compared prospect out of all of these. So, yeah, of course, if you're the Texans and you can say, let's go get a defensive guy at 2 and maybe a receiver at 12 or whatever it is, and then get Caleb Williams next year, you'd love to do that ideally. But I think this is where a lot of fans too get concerned, whether they're Texans fans or fans of other teams, mostly fans of other teams who are just looking outside in. When it comes to tanking and projecting as one of the worst teams in the league, tanking is only ever happening half-heartedly, even from a top-down perspective. The team that steps out there on the field every Sunday, from the head coach to the assistant coaches to the players, they are all trying to win with everything they have inside of them. That's just how it goes. These players and coaches are all auditioning for future jobs at all times, or for at least the opportunity to keep their current job. So you can't guarantee that, you're going to be the worst team in the league next year and get Caleb Williams. It's not that slam dunk of a play to make. So I don't think that's how they're going to be approaching this upcoming season. And I don't think you believe that either. It's just kind of a thing that if the chips fall that way, then great, you get Caleb Williams. But I think it's dangerous for the Texans to go another year without trying to find an answer at quarterback. But if the Stroud news is true, I don't really know what more they could do. My point with Mills going into next year was more that I feel like they will turn to a different quarterback who may just be just as mediocre or something. I just don't know. Davis Mills has had 2 relatively uninspiring years. He was decent his rookie year, but ultimately, it was 17 touchdowns, 15 picks or something like that. It was one of those things that's like, okay, this was good if you can build on it, and then he didn't build on it. So
and how would you feel for him to be a sitting duck, basically? Like, hey, we're going to roll with you again. You're our guys, right. But you know damn well that they wanted a quarterback this year, and they're probably going to want one next year.
Yeah, I don't know. There's not many quarterbacks available on the free agent market anymore that you would feel good about going to instead of Mills. You've got like Teddy Bridgewater, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan if he doesn't hang him up. And it's just a really tough spot for the Texans to be in with this, Stroud, I don't know if I want to call it news or a situation, I guess. I feel like the Texans may be moving toward, taking a defensive player. Look, maybe they take Will Levis at 12 if he slides or something like that. Or maybe they just hang tight with Mills for the first round and then they go and get, if a Hendon Hooker falls to the second or third, or they go and get Stetson Bennett really late, and then you just have a quarterback competition, and maybe Stetson, takes him over, or you got a guy like Jake Haener. Who knows? A lot of these guys will probably not be ready to start their rookie year anyway. Stetson, if he doesn't start his rookie year, will just be 45 by the time he is ready to start. But anyway, no, it's just a really tough situation for the Texans to be in. Their best case, though, is to, be kind of bad this year and get Caleb Williams. But look, they're on the come up, whether we realize it or not. Like, they're trying to win. That's why they hired DeMeco Ryans. That's why, they're going to spend these 2 picks on good players. Like, it's just a really iffy situation for them. And then, all right, current Texans to a former Texan, DeAndre Hopkins. So DeAndre Hopkins has sorta shared his preferences for next season. There was a really creatively done interview, I will say, where somebody didn't outright ask him where he wanted to play next season, but he said, look, don't give me any words, just give me a facial expression for which team how you feel about these teams that I'm about to list. So he listed, I believe it was the Patriots, the Bills, the Chiefs. I'm missing some. Jets. Okay, Jets. And there may have been one more, but either way, I know it was those four.
It was just those four.
Okay, just those four. All right, so he reacted, shocker, very favorably to the Chiefs and the Bills, and not as favorably to the Patriots and the Jets. I know, a real shock that a guy toward the end of his career is wanting to compete for a ring and wants to go to these teams that have made it deep in the playoffs. I was maybe a little surprised by the Jets' reaction, just because they're about to have Aaron Rodgers, and that would be the best quarterback Hopkins has ever played with, but I understand that the Jets as a franchise, it's still, there's question marks there. You don't want to maybe be part of another mess.
So funny that they're like, hey, would you rather play for these two mid at best at the moment organizations, or literally the two best teams in the NFL? Like, you couldn't have thrown someone like someone else in there. Like that was what took me aback by it. That's what made me laugh about the whole thing. And also just his reactions were just funny. Like his yes reaction where he's like, mm-hmm, and then the stern turn away like he's a shamed dog. Like that was it was a stupid video, but it was a good. I had a good time watching that.
I'm with you. But yeah, I agree. Like throw some wild cards in there. Throw in I don't know. Throw in the Browns or something like that. The Texans. Throw in the Browns. He used to play with Deshaun. I mean, that was the best quarterback he's played with up to this point. Throw in I don't know, the Giants made the playoffs last year. Maybe that's interesting to him, as opposed to a team like the Patriots that got bounced immediately, and a team like the Jets that didn't make it at all. Giants, he would be their easy wide receiver one, and he would get all the work in the world on a team that just made the playoffs and won a game. So I don't know. It was people making something out of nothing. It's breaking news. Water is wet, sky is blue. DeAndre Hopkins wants to win.
Wants to play with Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. You could probably do that for 99% of the league, and they would give you a big old grin to play with those guys. Come on. Yeah, a real shock there. All right, back to a couple of draft-related notes. So, Pat, I know you saw it. There was a video that went around Twitter this past week. Basically, clips of Merrill Hodge, evaluating quarterbacks pre-draft over the past several seasons, and Merrill Hodge is basically clairvoyant, apparently. It was him talking down a lot of the top, rated quarterbacks the past few years. Just off the top of my head, there was Johnny Manziel, Vince Young, Matt Leinart, and he was just saying how he would never spend a top pick on these guys. Johnny Manziel, I believe he said he would not draft in any round. And he said definitely not the top three.
Yeah, and so I feel like this guy needs to have a bigger platform for the NFL draft. Now, look, I was researching a little bit. I heard there had been some controversy on Merrill Hodge that I was not previously familiar with. He has authored and pushed a book about how CTE is not real or not as big of a deal as it's being made out to be. That's a pretty dangerous stance to take, and so I understand why these networks may not be giving him a platform.
Sounds like something a guy with CTE would say.
That's a very good point. I see why maybe they don't want to give this guy a platform, but I will say it's unfortunate that he has that stance and that he has that kind of blemish on his namesake at this point, because I didn't realize what a psychic he was with quarterback. I want to hear what he has to say about this quarterback class. Is he going to tell me I wouldn't touch Bryce Young with a 20-foot pole because he's too short, but I would take Jake Hayner with the first overall? I want to hear what he has to say. It was just crazy to hear all that.
The funniest one by far was Johnny Manziel, because he and then Skip Bayless in his all theatrics just goes, Merrill Hodge, in all the years I've known you, you've never been more wrong than you are right now. And it's just this guy's just such a jackass. It was the perfect video because it was about Johnny Manziel and Skip Bayless. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not looking. I mean, hindsight's 2020, but looking back, the red flags were there with Johnny Manziel. He was right, but I don't think there's not these guys that are coming in that were college stars like Johnny Manziel or Tim Tebow in this class. These are guys who are more quote unquote, we'll get into quarterback hyperboles in just a minute, but quote unquote NFL ready guys. There's none of these super college studs that had the production, but it's not going to translate. We don't have any of those for him to go in on.
Yeah, so naturally, videos like that are starting to circulate more and more with the draft coming up. And another video that circulated that you just mentioned was from Freezing Cold Takes. So Freezing Cold Takes put together a different compilation of many, many different draft analysts talking about quarterbacks who completely busted. And it's hilarious because all of the comparisons are just this guy is an absolute slam dunk. This team's going to be looking back in a few years, just so glad that they made this pick. Like, they've got their Peyton Manning, and that, I believe that one specifically was in reference to Ryan Leaf. It just goes to show you, like, take yourself out of the moment sometimes when you're listening to like the current draft evaluations and be like, okay, the guys that I'm listening to, as much as they may have an educated opinion more so than, myself as a fan, as a viewer, these guys are wrong a lot. And so it's okay to have a differing opinion, because that video, if you guys haven't seen it, look it up. Freezing Cold Takes on Twitter, they put it together, and it's like 2 or 3 minutes of just the funniest quarterback takes I've ever seen.
A lot of Brady Quinn content in there.
Yeah.
Like, it's stuff like, oh, I'd let my daughter marry this guy. It's like, oh my God. And Fred Siegel, behind Freezing Cold Takes, he has a book of just bad NFL draft takes, and it's one that every time I see him tweet about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I should get that, and then just never do it. But like from what I've heard, it's just a great book that'll probably conjure up a lot of good and bad memories depending on where you fall. But I one of these days I will check it out.
Yeah, I would love to check that out myself. I think it's just a good reminder of, like, we're all just guessing at this point. Like, unless even the people who are scouts and like know the game at the highest level are wrong all the time. That's why these guys are picked as high as they are. It's like, are you going to say that you know more than, the scouts and the team of people that chose to select Johnny Manziel? Of course you're not going to say you know more than them about football, but like, they whiffed on that pick monumentally. So it's just like, just remember, everybody, your opinion on players is, as long as you've done some research and have something to back it up, it's just as valid as anybody else's opinion, because these guys, they just get so many things wrong all the time. And we come on this podcast, we talk from a position of, not authority, but we're up on a little pedestal here on a podcast. But we admit that, like, we don't know everything. We're just coming on here to talk some ball and give our opinions and give our takes. That's what gives me such a problem with guys like, exactly. It's just what gives me such a problem with guys like Skip Bayless, who are so authoritative and are like, I'm absolutely right. There is no way in hell I could ever be like. I come on here, I'm like, hey guys, here's what I think. I understand that I could be wrong and it could go the other way, but like, I just want to talk to you guys. That's what it should be. I understand it's not as sensationalized, and maybe that won't get the clicks, but yeah. Oh my God, Mel Kiper. Yeah, perfect example. But yeah, it's just a good reminder that these guys are, just like me and you in a lot of ways. So, all right, speaking of draft busts and getting things wrong, guys, it's been a couple weeks since we did our last draft, and we want to do a little draft here of the biggest busts in NFL draft history. We are going to each put together a list of 5 guys, and you guys tell us which of our 5 is the bustiest.
Who's the bustier? Yeah, I think I am. But
you might be. I mean, hey, look, back in high school, we were challenging a little bit. I was a little chunkier. All right, but who's going to put together the bustier list? Pat, I will do you the honor of giving you the first pick here, because you gave me the first pick in the last draft. So kick us off with your number 1 overall pick in the bust.
This is so hard, because like, there are realistically like 3-4 guys that I'm looking at right now where it's like they are the big bust. And granted, I looked a little later. There are some older guys on my list, and I looked at it in a few ways in perspective, like who's behind them. Like, who else could the guys have taken? How early did they go? There's really only one guy on my list that's outside of the top 10 at all. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to do it. It might be a little biased here. With the first pick in the 2007 NFL Draft, the Oakland Raiders select Codeine Man himself, Jamarcus Russell. That was the first NFL draft I was ever invested in. I was not a Raider fan at the time, and the Ben Roethlisberger comparisons that, like, this guy's a slam dunk. They had Calvin Johnson sitting right behind them, and they take a guy who is, well, what did Stephen A. call him? Jabba the Hutt, you fat slob. Like, he had a great Jamarcus Russell rant. And that said, it's bad enough to say I've got 2 other Raider picks on this list. My list, but just set them back so far. And I know he might not be the biggest bust. I think I'm going to hand you one right here, but I had to have him.
I can understand that. He would have been my first pick as well. And look, you mentioned Calvin Johnson. The pick right after that was perennial All-Pro offensive tackle Joe Thomas. So, like, you got 2 All-Pro Hall of Fame level players taken after Jamarcus Russell. Obviously, the Raiders at that time weren't going to do anything but take a quarterback, but still just kind of puts in perspective how awful of a pick that was. Pat, my first pick, There's a few guys I feel like I'm looking at here, but I'm going to go with Ryan Leaf. Ryan Leaf was touted as, 1A and 1B with Peyton Manning, and that, needless to say, did not materialize. It left the Chargers looking for a quarterback, basically immediately after, and it just, him and Peyton Manning could not have had more opposite career trajectories. So I feel comfortable with Ryan Leaf as my first overall pick.
Yeah, that's probably the correct number 1 overall pick, and I remember Mel Kiper like, oh, this guy, Ryan Leaf, what a mistake. And then Bill Polian was like, who the hell is Mel Kiper? Like,
yeah.
Probably one of the most iconic draft moments in recent memory. Man. Okay. Obviously, if you didn't take Leaf, I was going to, but I was not expecting to get him. So I'm going to go not a really deep cut here, but I think a lot of this goes by who goes around this guy. With the 2nd overall pick in the 1989 draft, the Green Bay Packers select Tony Mandarich, offensive tackle, a guy who could not stay in shape, could not stay healthy, unfortunately got popped for steroids a bit, but you look at that 1989 draft, Troy Aikman, Tony Mandarich, Barry Sanders, Derek Thomas, and Deion Sanders. My God. So you look at with how bad.
So there weren't any good players. There weren't any good players after.
You've got literally not just good players that making Pro Bowls. We're talking 4 of the all-time greats going around this guy. So I think that vaults him towards the top of my list.
I can respect that. I am going to go back to the quarterback position, as I will for, I think, most of my picks. Look, the Cleveland Browns have been no strangers to quarterback bust. This may not be the first or last Brown that I take, but I'm going to go with Tim Couch. First overall pick, 1999, selected directly before Donovan McNabb, and I'll list off some players that went after that as well. Look, this was the top. I'll go 11 in the 1999 draft. There was Tim Couch, Donovan McNabb, Akili Smith, also a valid option for this list.
Also on my list, yeah.
But after
flash Akili Smith on my list.
Yeah, after that we've got Edgerrin James, Ricky Williams, Torrey Holt, Champ Bailey, David Boston, Chris Claiborne, Chris McAllister, and Dante Culpepper. So you've got 2 quarterbacks there in the top 11 that would have been better picks than Tim Couch, being McNabb and Culpepper, and then countless other great players at other positions. Tim Couch, just the epitome of the quarterback struggles that have plagued the Browns. They have not been able to get that position right in the draft. And, the more I look into it, the more I almost, not that I understand it because it's disgusting, but for them to overlook, the things that Deshaun Watson did just to get a halfway decent player under center for them, I guess it makes a little sense because they've just been horrific at drafting that position.
That's a good one. Like I said, Couch and Akili Smith were high on my list. I think I'm going to avoid Akili Smith now that he's already been mentioned. I'm going to go very, very recent, not too recent, but within the last handful of years. With the 10th pick in the 2018 draft, the Arizona Cardinals select Josh Rosen.
Great pick.
You look at I based this pick, I based the Mandarich pick off of, guys who went around him. Josh Rosen just stinks. And this isn't we're not talking like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold and obviously Josh Allen's great, but these big 4 really didn't turn into what they could have. So the fact that he's that bad in comparison to Mayfield, where he was so bad that the Cardinals went and used back-to-back first-round top 10 picks on a quarterback because they knew that they had nothing in this guy. And, wherever he's gone since, he's just been a perennial trampoline bouncing off the league. I just think that out of actual talent-wise, and everybody said, he goes, I'm going to make those 9 teams pay for the mistake that they made. It's stick it. This guy is probably the worst player on my list, in terms of talent-wise.
I believed him too. I was a Josh Rosen believer at the time. I was like, man, why aren't teams drafted he's from UCLA? He looks like a clean-cut kid. He looks like he's going to be a good player at this position. Let your
daughter marry?
Right, and all he had was a giant nose and a bad attitude, and that was pretty much it. So no, I love that pick. That was probably where I was going with my next pick if you didn't take him. So that's a great little snipe by you, not unlike you in our actual fantasy football drafts too, you dick. Take my picks all the time, every year. But
we're just the 2 smartest, most handsome guys in the league that you win, I never win. We're the same guy.
It's the beards. All the knowledge is in the beards. All right. Yeah. With my next pick, I'm going to go a similar route, but somehow, Pat, even more recent than that.
I know who's coming.
That's right. I've stated on the podcast in the past that I believe this man can and may go down as the biggest bust in NFL draft history, and that will be the New York Jets and BYU's own Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson, very similar to Josh Rosen in the sense that they just don't have the internal makeup to be a quarterback. They don't have the leadership qualities. You had Zach Wilson, notoriously this past year not saying he didn't believe he let his defense down, despite the Jets having a great defense and Zach Wilson not being able to lead a drive to save his life. Now it led to, after only 2 seasons, the Jets having to eventually trade for Aaron Rodgers with one of the biggest contracts in the NFL, giving up, decent assets, we think, to do so. Again, it's so ridiculous we have to talk about this trade that hasn't happened yet, but we know it's going to. Anyway, they've had to move on from Zach Wilson, and you look at the players drafted around him. This is the thing that I feel like it'll age better than how it looks right now, because the quarterbacks that were drafted after him, it's nothing insane, right? Like, you had Trevor Lawrence drafted before him. You understand that Lawrence is probably going to go down as the best quarterback in the class. Then you've got Trey Lance. Haven't seen him yet fairly, but look, if he ends up as a decent player, that's going to make the Wilson pick look even worse. You've got Justin Fields, who is only getting better and, showed some star potential last year. That's only going to make the Wilson pick look worse. And Mac Jones, who I don't know what his ceiling is in this league, but I do have some optimism that he'll get back to more rookie Mac form this upcoming season with a real offensive coordinator. That's going to make the pick look worse, because Zach Wilson is going to be potentially the worst quarterback taken in that draft. Even looking down the future rounds, like Kyle Trask was taken. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Kyle Trask has a more meaningful career than Zach Wilson does when it's all said and done. So just Zach Wilson, absolute whiff.
Yeah, that was my next pick. Bring on the MILFs. I'm gonna, this is more of a deep cut because I'm gonna go non-quarterback again here, and we're gonna go back to probably the worst draft in recent memory, 2013, with a 3rd overall pick. The Miami Dolphins select Deion Jordan. And we are talking a draft that was not good. There are only 3 guys in that top 10 who have ever made a Pro Bowl. Eric Fisher, who, again, not a bust, not good enough to be the 1st overall pick, but a decent player, made a Pro Bowl. Ziggy Ansah, who made 1 Pro Bowl, and then Lane Johnson, who's like the diamond in that rough of good players. The fact that in such a bad draft, we're talking about this guy is like the ultimate bust. The guy barely played, got popped for PEDs a couple times. Just, this guy was the defensive player in that draft, full of offensive linemen, and he was just a non-factor.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. Again, bold to not go quarterback here, and I think it was a good time not to do it, though. It's like when you look at all-time NFL draft busts, a lot of the time the quarterbacks take the biggest heat because they are the ones that are viewed as the franchise saviors, right? And so when another position lets you down almost as much or as much as a quarterback bust can, it says a lot about how poorly that pick went. So that's a good pick there with Deion Jordan. With my next pick, I'm really between 2 guys here. Again, both quarterbacks. And I think I'm going. I'm not going to take a quarterback with my last pick. That's a spoiler alert. My last pick is a kind of off the grid, but not really off the grid pick. I'm gonna go with Matt Leinart here. I think.
I didn't even have him on my list.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Matt Leinart. Matt Leinart, college national champion, darling of USC. I just think the expectations for him to succeed at the next level were there, and it just never materialized. He was supposed to be the guy that took over for Kurt Warner in Arizona, and instead they were left looking for another quarterback. And him and Vince Young, similar kind of thing, right? Like both incredibly successful college careers and just could not put it together at the NFL level. So I'm going to just take one of those guys. I'm going to go with Leinart and see what I can round out my draft with here in the next round.
And I'll talk you through my last pick here. Some of these guys that I had on my list that I won't take. I referenced one guy out of the top 10. That is Johnny Manziel. I'm not going to pick Johnny Manziel just because
he was who I was just thinking about.
He was the 24th pick.
Exactly.
They could have taken him earlier too, so he's not going to make my list. I've got a batch of wide receivers here. John Ross going in the top 10 to the Bengals, just a guy who just cannot play. Like, he has just not stayed healthy. Justin Blackmon, from the Jags, the 5th overall pick, a guy who
so
could not stay out of his own way. Like, such a great talent out of Oklahoma State. And the last one, a personal one, Darius Hayward-Bay to the Raiders, number 7, 2009. They could have taken Jeremy Maclin, Michael Crabtree, Percy Harvin, and Al Davis just loved those fast guys. And granted, Hayward Bay made a career for himself. He was in the league for way longer than he should have. But, I mean, they got Crabtree like 10 years later, so, like, they won. Like, they won that draft for sure. So I'm between two guys. One is a quarterback and one is a Raider.
Okay.
I know you're not going to take the quarterback. So neither am I. Another very recent. Well, let's head back to the 2019 draft with the 4th overall pick. The Raiders select Clelin Ferrell.
Okay.
At the time, I was gobsmacked. I remember exactly where I was watching that, and I'm thinking, I'm like, oh, they're going to get Josh Allen. They're going to get Ed Oliver. They're going to get Devin White, Devin Bush. And when they took Ferrell, I just could not believe it. Could not believe that they did that. And you look back at that Khalil Mack trade, and it's like all they got out of it, Clelin Ferrell, Jonathan Abram, and Josh Jacobs, great player, Josh Jacobs. But for what they could have gotten, like, that was when I finally realized that this Gruden guy is just a fucking bozo.
Yeah.
And Mike Mayock is a bozo. And granted, it turns out Gruden's a lot worse things than that. But, I don't have the name recognition, the star power. But with my last pick, I had to take the most personal one to me. And I took that very personally.
I respect that, Pat. It's funny because you can kind of categorize busts into two categories, right? You have the guys who you fully expect them to be really, really good players. And then you have guys that you knew it was a reach when it happened. And Clelin Ferrell was one of those guys, 1,000%. You know who I almost thought you were going to say here in a similar vein, but I guess wasn't picked quite as high? Alex Leatherwood, Raiders. Another Raider pick.
When I told my dad, Raiders fan, that we were doing this, the first name he said was Leatherwood. I'm like, he was taking the 17th pick. But again, just another guy that has no business being on an NFL field, let alone going in the first round. Like, brutal. And again, set them back. They could have a great guy like Josh Allen with Max Crosby. Oh, just the thought of that. And they took Max Crosby in like the 4th round of that draft.
Yeah.
Like, they're hitting on the I gotta stop. My other option was gonna be Jake Locker. It was either gonna be It was either gonna be Clelin Ferrell or Jake Locker.
Jake Locker. You know who I didn't pick, and now I'm mad because he's so heavily tied to Mel Kiper, was Jimmy Clausen. Because he staked his career on Jimmy Clausen.
Kickbacks from his agent. No question.
I swear. No,
all
he must have been.
Jimmy Clausen. Like, stop it, Mel.
I'm going to stake my career on Jimmy Clausen. Well, Mel is still around, so he is a dirty, dirty liar. I guess the reason we wouldn't go with him, he was a second-round pick, 48th overall, but he did have the success in college. Pat, with my pick, it's funny, a lot of parallels to your pick. Also, in the 2019 NFL Draft. Also, a very personal connection. I'm going with N'Keal Harry to round out my picks. And you want to know why I'm going with N'Keal Harry? Because of a few things. You've got the fact that he was just god-awful, but we've talked about the players that get drafted around these players, right? So N'Keal Harry was the second drafted receiver in this draft. Not first overall. Before him was Marquise Hollywood Brown. Okay, solid player. Understandable.
Better than him by a lot.
Better than him by a lot. Then you've got N'Keal Harry. And then, Pat, these are the wide receivers drafted in order, not skipping any, not omitting any wide receivers. These are the receivers.
JJ Arcega-Whiteside draft too. Isn't he in this? Or am I confusing him with someone else?
He may be. Hold on, I may have. Now that you say that, I may have accidentally disregarded him, and I don't want to be lying to the people about the in order part of this. So hold on.
I could be completely wrong.
No, you're right. He was in this class. I just need to make sure. Okay, he is here, and I would have missed him. So thank you for that. And I also would have missed Paris Campbell and Andy Isabella. Okay, these are the receivers drafted directly after N'Keal Harry in order. So you've got Deebo Samuel, you've got A.J. Brown, you've got Mecole Hardman. Again, not the greatest player in the world, but has a role, solid player.
NFL player, absolutely.
J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, bust, whatever. Paris Campbell, serviceable enough, would rather have him than N'Keal Harry. Andy Isabella, no. DK Metcalf, Deontay Johnson, Jalen Hurts, who bust, and then Terry McLaurin. Pat, that's like 70% borderline Pro Bowl players taken after N'Keal Harry out of the receivers that were taken.
Is like the fact that the Eagles took Arcega-Whiteside right before Metcalf. So N'Keal Harry wasn't even on my radar because that's how J.J. Arcega-Whiteside was so bad that he's notable. But N'Keal Harry just never touched the field. We'll never know if he's any good or not because he never touched the field. You talk about Bill Belichick being this great coach. The guy is not a terrific drafter, especially with these skill guys in these early rounds. Sonny Michel, they have some pretty high profile whiffs on skill players early.
No, I was just looking at the Patriots overall first round picks the other day, and Pat, they haven't really had a good one in like a decade. So it is kind of tough.
Strange like that.
Cole Strange, he might be the best one other than like Mac. But look, you look at the past, since 2013. All right, so 2013. No first-round pick. 2014, Dominic Easley. 2015, Malcolm Brown. 2016 and 17, no first-round pick. Probably traded back. I'm not going to look into it, but I'm guessing, knowing Bill, traded back. 2018, Isaiah Wynn and Sony Michel. 2019, N'Keal Harry. 2020, no pick. 2021, Mac Jones. 2022, Cole Strange. Maybe these last 2 years have been better. Cole Strange wasn't terrible, but it still was a reach. And
looking ass.
I don't know. Yeah, I had to go with N'Keal Harry. Another guy, what kind of inspired me to remember N'Keal Harry and all the receivers taken after him was Jalen Reagor, because I was like, I could take Reagor with just the note that Justin Jefferson went right after him, but there weren't a ton of consecutively good receivers taken after him. I just remember that Harry was in a class with so many guys better than him and yet got drafted ahead of them.
I think Rager's is probably more. Just that one example still makes it more significant because Jefferson's that good, but the sheer volume from the Harry, I think Harry's the pick there. I didn't see from a mile away. I didn't even think about writing him down.
Yeah, so that's going to round out my list. So to sum it up, Pat's got Jamarcus Russell, Tony Mandarich, Josh Rosen, Deion Jordan, and Cleveland Farrell. I've got Ryan Leaf, Tim Couch, Zach Wilson, Matt Leinart, and N'Keal Harry. Quite the squads we put together here. So
you're going to win again. You've got the notoriety, but I stand by my picks tenfold.
I mean, you're basically building a starting lineup of busts. Like, that's what you're doing. I have 4 QBs and a receiver. You've got 2 QBs, an O lineman, a D line, 2 D linemen actually. So that's a more well-rounded team. I can totally understand that. All right, we are looking ahead still in the NFL draft, and Pat, we're going to take a little fantasy football perspective here because we are at our core fantasy football guys. And honestly, as the season approaches and as the draft gets done, there's going to be a lot of fantasy football content on this podcast. So we want to start off here first and foremost with the fantasy football situations to watch in the NFL draft, like the situations that can be affected the most and are likely to be, or at least have the potential to be, in the NFL draft. So Pat, starting off, I've just got running backs whose workhorse roles may be at stake here in the draft. Inevitably, every year we've got guys in fantasy football who are drafted more for their workload projection than their actual talent. And these are the guys that could be victims of that. Now, the first one is one that doesn't necessarily apply to the talent part. We know he's a talented guy. He's entering probably the peak of his career, and that is Tony Pollard. I think Tony Pollard, given the role by himself, even with just a partial role, we saw last year, complimenting Ezekiel Elliott and kind of taking the lead role as the season went on, he can make noise with a partial role. So if the Cowboys draft somebody here, it's not the end of the world. I just think this is a spot where Jerry Jones loves toys. We know this. Jerry Jones loves his skill players. So it would not surprise me in the least to see him get a running back, be it Bijan Robinson or some other running back later in the draft, to split the work with Tony. And I think that would be unfortunate because as it stands right now, I think Tony's probably a first-round pick. But if they were to draft somebody, it could. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I do think they probably will draft a running back, but I don't know if on the level, like you look at the rest of that depth chart, Malik Davis and Ronald Jones apparently found that out today.
I didn't realize that
they're going to need someone better than those two. But I think whoever they draft will be more of the complement to Tony Pollard. I mean, Tony Pollard was just so good this past year. He can run, he can catch the ball too. So I really, out of all of these that we're going to talk about, I hope that this does not happen to him. I hope that he at least like an 80-20 kind of workload right now for Tony Pollard is what I am praying for.
This is really Bijan watch, because I agree with you. Like, there's no other running back in this class that's going to take significant work from a guy like Tony Pollard, who showed so much promise, barring a guy who just absolutely bursts onto the scene in camp. So it's really just a matter of Bijan or not. I think a more likely spot for Bijan, as I mentioned last week, would be the Philadelphia Eagles, which would render a guy like Rashad Penny useless, borderline. Like Rashad Penny has to be a guy, maybe not useless, might be too harsh, but Rashad Penny is a guy who I think has maybe the biggest range of outcomes right now for this upcoming fantasy season as we sit here before the draft. Because if the Eagles take a guy like Bijan Robinson, Rashad Penny, he's not going to be the starting running back, or at least I'd be very surprised if he was. He would get some complimentary work and all whatnot, but he is on a contract that makes it very easy to move on from him if they want to before the season even starts. But it's also a guy that we've seen have some really, really nice games for the Seahawks. He just can't stay healthy. So if the Eagles head into next season without adding a running back, which is a possibility. I mean, they've got Penny, they've got Gainwell, they've got Boston Scott. It's a very Eagles-looking backfield. If they go in without adding somebody, Penny could be a guy who's a serviceable RB2 for your fantasy team. If they draft Bijan Robinson, that's probably out the window.
Yeah, Robinson. If again, we're about 10 days away. If I'm projecting Robinson somewhere, it's to the Eagles. Just you can't go into the season trusting Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny is an immense talent. We've seen it, but you guy cannot stay healthy, and you cannot confidently go into a really competitive division, a really competitive conference with Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott, who are fine little complementary pieces. But you need somebody in place for if or when something happens to Rashad Penny. Again, I would love to see him pop off because this is a great offense. This is a run-first offense. Going to be a lot of scoring opportunities. But I think they need a better contingency plan. Like I feel like the fact that they haven't gotten a bigger contingency plan yet means that one is coming.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think you look at, the free agent running backs as well. There's not a ton of guys out there, but there are some options, and I think those dominoes will start to fall when the draft is over. Because I was talking about this with a friend the other day. He was like, "Why hasn't Kareem Hunt been signed?" Other than the fact that Kareem Hunt kind of fell off a little bit last year, I think the main reason is you've got teams coming into the draft like, can I get a guy who gives me Kareem Hunt-esque production for an absolute fraction of the price? Inevitably, some of the teams thinking that need that production aren't going to get it in the draft. And that's when they may call Kareem Hunt and be like, okay, now we'll pay for it, I guess. So I think that could be an answer for the Eagles. If they don't end up going Bijan, they could go and just sign a guy like Kareem Hunt maybe to add to the backfield. But as of now, I'm with you. I'm projecting Bijan to the Eagles, and just what a scary sight that's going to be. Another guy who is purely workload related, I believe, in fantasy football is James Conner. James Conner hasn't shown a ton of, exciting potential, a ton of energy in those legs. Like, he's a guy that's just benefits from being the only guy really in the Arizona backfield. Arizona is a team we've talked about is firmly trending down, but you can find fantasy value in bad teams as well. But he's a guy whose value would just be nuked if they spent a high pick on a running back.
Even if they do, I don't love his value just from the sense that
neither do I.
The injury concerns and the fact that this guy is so touchdown dependent. Like, he had a fantastic 2021, which was so heavy on touchdowns. And you saw last year they were a lot worse team. And I mean, granted, he still produced to an extent, but I would be stunned if they don't draft some kind of running back, especially one that can catch the ball, because, Connor is not devoid of receiving skills, but that's not his thing. And they've got Corey Clement and Keontae Ingram and your boy Tyson Williams from the Ravens throwback. But
it's just a backfield that screams, we need one more guy.
We need to, honestly, like, I think in theory that's a great fit for Bijan Robinson, but like, they're gonna stink. So like, who cares?
I hope that's not where he ends up, just for everybody's sake, because that just sounds miserable.
Even honestly, regardless of what we're talking about with James Conner, I don't like his outlook, regardless of what they do. And I'm gonna say the same thing about our next guy, Cam Akers. I don't think that he is. What a roller coaster he had last year. A top 30 pick, I believe. Like he was getting picked in the third round routinely, and then behind Kieran Williams, it was like, oh, Kieran Williams is going to come off IR and he's going to be the guy. He wasn't. And then you've got this guy as a genuine league winner, and now they haven't gone out and gotten anybody to really compliment him besides Williams and Ronnie Rivers, who had a week last year where he had like 10 carries. It's like, stop.
Yeah.
So it's like this almost feels like another situation where it's inevitable, especially with how much the Rams like toys, though they don't have a lot of draft picks.
Right. So I'm totally with you there on Cam. And I think much like James Conner, it's a matter of, do I like these guys as, RB1s, RB2s as it is? Not really. It's just like, how much will this zap whatever value they have left? And I think if they add another notable name to any of these backfields, even halfway notable, somebody that makes it so you're not getting 20 plus carries 20 plus carries even in a bad offense has its value. But like, it's like, okay, if you're going to be in a bad offense and not get those 20 carries, you can kick rocks. Like, I will draft anybody else for the upside instead of you. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if with the Rams, like, will Stafford be healthy? Will he look like the guy he looked like when they won the Super Bowl? If that's the case, it's still a Sean McVay offense. They could be a lot more competent, but at the same time, you're looking at the floor is the basement for this team from what we saw last year. So like, you're just banking on volume, which I don't like to begin with. It's a risky play, and especially if they bring someone else in.
Yeah, Cam Akers just a guy that you look up and down the running back depth charts of the NFL, and you're like, that is a volatile name as far as like I would not be surprised if he lost his job at some point throughout the season, despite, these bursts of production that we've seen over the years and over the course of last season. So overall, I want to just talk about the best running back landing spots in general for fantasy. So not necessarily that these teams have guys that were worried about them losing their jobs. I talked about the Eagles first, so we don't have to really go through that. Obviously, that's the ideal fantasy landing spot for a running back. Not a ton of competition there with Penny and Gainwell and just one of the best offenses in football. You get a piece of that, you're golden. These other spots, I got the Cincinnati Bengals. We talked about this a little last week. If Joe Mixon leaves, of course, is the caveat there. That is one of the best offenses in football and does not have a running quarterback, which just makes it even more ideal in my mind. Like, this is a team that if they got rid of Joe Mixon and gave the keys to whoever they, bring on, be it a guy like Izzy Abanaconda from Pitt or somebody to that effect, this could be a spot where you see a guy like how Dameon Pierce emerged last year. Obviously, totally different team situations because the Texans were bad, but if you can have a guy like Pierce and throw him on the Bengals, oh boy, like that is an interesting spot. So I'll be curious to see what happens with Mixon, and if they get a guy in the draft that they are willing to hand, the 3 down back, or at the very least the RB1 keys over to. And then you've got the Miami Dolphins I had as the other spot because, Pat, they're just kind of rolling out the same gaggle of running backs that they've had. They've got Raheem Mostert. They've got Jeff Wilson. They've got Savon Ahmed, Myles Gaskin. Those two guys have been there forever. And then, obviously, Mostert and Wilson, the Niner defects. So they are just – none of those guys are guys that you – are worried about putting up like an RB1 season by themselves, right? So if you add a guy there through the draft – I don't know how that touch distribution goes because, of course, Mike McDaniel does love his old Niner running backs. But at the very least, you have maybe you draft a guy that has higher upside than any of those guys, and you're in the Dolphins offense.
That's the thing is I think if they do decide to stick with what they do, they're fine. Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson both had a lot of good games last year. Granted, they weren't playing together a ton due to injury. But honestly, like I basically view Mike McDaniel as Kyle Shanahan light. And the 49ers loved drafting running backs with decent capital that they just did nothing with. Hello, Trey Sermon. Hello, Tyrion Davis-Price. Like, could we see the Dolphins use decent capital on a running back and have them not be a factor because you've got these not mediocre, these average guys like Wilson and Mostert? Yes. I think we could come back in 2 weeks and we could say, wow, the Dolphins drafted this guy in the 3rd round, but not going to be a factor.
Not using them. Yeah, you just got a bunch of like B- running backs. I feel like who can play like A- running backs if it's on the right week, but just nobody spectacular. And on an offense that has a lot of spectacular players, and the wide receiving core, it's like, okay, are you ever going to get a running back to match it? Not that it's necessary, but it would just be a nice little luxury, and it would be a fun thing to watch if a guy got the full keys to the RB1 role there. Some other running back situations to watch here, just from I don't even know what perspective to say from, but just the biggest kind of running back storylines. Will the Giants or Chargers draft a running back with Saquon and Eckler's futures unclear? This will give us some insight into what these teams are planning to do with these players potentially. Look, I don't expect the Giants to draft Bijan Robinson because then it's like 12 alarm fire, they're going to trade Saquon, right? Like the headlines will be off the wall the night of the draft. But it is something to watch. Like if these teams spend, I don't know, a 2nd round pick on a running back, is it a contingency plan for losing these guys? I think it's more likely to happen for Eckler that they add, another name to that Charger running back room in case that, at the very least, Eckler may be gone after next season. But Saquon, I'm not as worried about. But look, maybe I will become draft night. I don't know.
I still think the Giants probably draft a running back because besides that, you're looking at Matt Breida and then like Gary Brightwell, who's like a hybrid fullback, like a big boy, like small fullback guy. And they could kind of play it off as like, hey, we're just building up our depth. And then obviously you said the Dolphins have a gaggle of mediocre running backs. Look at that Chargers backup. Josh Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, who was
how is Josh Kelly still there? I don't understand.
A lot of people liked Isaiah Spiller coming out last year from Texas A&M, including myself. And then Larry Roundtree was another guy that when they took him a few years ago. Do they just keep looking for this like middle round guy that can maybe fill in? And I honestly throw the Raiders into this too, with Josh Jacobs not reporting right away for the voluntary workouts. Behind him, they don't have Zamir White, Brandon Bolden,
Marcel Reese. He's still around. Can we get Marcel Reese back?
One of my favorite players ever. And Amir Abdul is the other guy. So it's like, honestly, even if these guys draft someone, they could pose it, they could frame it as like, oh, we're not worried about our guy. That's our guy, and he's our guy. But at the same time, it's a really good fallback.
Yeah, it's just kind of a look into what these teams might be thinking without them coming right out and saying it. So, and you're right, the Chargers, I just kind of noticed, do tend to just draft like the darling running backs of every draft, and it's really weird. Like, Josh Kelly was a guy who I believed in a lot coming out of college. Isaiah Spiller, same thing. Larry Roundtree, heard nothing but good things about. It's like, I don't know if it's just because of the hype of all these guys taking the early down role from Eckler before Eckler asserted himself as being like, I don't need anyone to take that from me. But I don't know, you're right. They do have just a bunch of names that it's like, man, they just are throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if anything can stick other than Eckler. So far, the answer's been no, but maybe they give it another shot in this draft. The other one, will the Chiefs give the reins to Isaiah Pacheco? Pat, this one came from you. What are your thoughts on this, and do you think Pacheco goes into next year as the lead dog?
See, I almost put him on the list of like guys who are in doubt of losing their job, but I'm even wondering, does he have his start? Does he have the job in the first place? A lot of these times draft capital doesn't always matter, but it does to an extent. And we're looking at a 7th round pick who looks pretty good in a really good offense. And it's clear that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a bit of a whiff, but Andy Reid likes using him. When he's out there, he's either rushing for a touchdown, catching a touchdown, and they don't have Jerick McKinnon as of right now. I wouldn't be surprised if they go and sign him, but they don't really have this receiving kind of back. And, we're talking again, the rich get richer. The Chiefs love toys. They love their little gadget toys, especially, we'll talk about their wide receiver room in a minute. They could be getting some jet sweep kind of action. I just don't know if they believe in Pacheco.
It's a valid question. It's one of those guys that especially fantasy football players fall in love with because we're like, oh my God, he runs so hard. He's on one of the best teams in the NFL. He's going to have the opportunities. But then, you're right. You kind of have to take a step back. He was a 7th round pick, and they may think they can find somebody who, in the future at least, will be better than Isaiah Pacheco. Like, we are not at a point right now where we can confidently say he is their RB1 of the future. As good as he looked, we've seen spurts like this before where guys go off, especially in Super Bowls. There was that crazy stat about how like no big name running back has been on a Super Bowl winner for like a decade. So maybe Pacheco joins that list and he kind of only made that little playoff run, and other than that, he'll just be a piece of that backfield. I hope that's not the case. I love watching the guy play. I would love if the Chiefs came out of this draft with no notable running backs and they don't really sign anybody and they head into next season with Pacheco as the starter. But it is a valid thing to bring up because I don't know that he's a guy that people are really thinking about right now in terms of losing his job because he looked so good at the end of last year.
It's funny because he's a guy that a lot of guys got right last year. They're saying, oh, Isaiah Pacheco, 7th round pick, going to be a guy. I drafted him late in a few leagues and it paid off big time at the end of the year. So it's like, is he going to get Pacheco'd by someone else possibly? Yeah. Because that offense, these running backs are like a revolving door.
Yeah, Isaiah Pacheco, the only reason that my team in our league wasn't a complete embarrassment by the end of the season.
2-12, yeah.
I had him and I think Mostert running out there for most of the year. Ended up scrounging out 5 wins or something like that. So shout out Isaiah Pacheco. I appreciate you. Moving from running backs to wide receivers, we got the best wide receiver landing spots for fantasy. Still on the Chiefs, Pat. Obviously, the Chiefs are number one. They just don't have any major brand names at receiver. Juju Smith-Schuster left for the Patriots in free agency. Mecole Hardman left for the Jets. Now they are down to Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, and Who else am I forgetting?
Valdez-Scantling.
Marquez Valdez-Scantling, that's right. So there's plenty of room here for an alpha wide receiver to step into, and anytime you have that potential with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, you have eyes wide open. So that'll be an interesting one.
But again, I feel like they don't need one. Their alpha wide receiver is Travis Kelce, and I really like Sky Moore. I really like Kadarius Toney if he can stay on the field. They're not, obviously no one's Tyreek Hill, but they could be a Tyreek Hill where they've got the speed to beat you downfield. They can do a jet sweep. They can catch a screen. Like, these are guys that fit perfectly into the Andy Reid Mahomes offense. But it wouldn't shock me at all though if they went out and got more of a traditional kind of guy.
Yeah, that's why I completely hesitate to call wide receiver a need for the Chiefs in the draft, because we've seen what they can do with just whoever they throw out there. It's just a matter of, if they do get somebody, let's get our eyes on them, especially if it's an early round pick, because that guy, maybe they want one. Who knows? And if they want one, that guy, Patrick Mahomes, wide receiver 1, not a bad gig to have. The next spot I've got here is the Chargers. Talked about this last week about just how Keenan Allen and Mike Williams seem to be hurt all the time. Having the guy who's kind of the contingency for that, not a bad thing either. Got the Giants. So the Giants don't really have any receivers. Injured Paris Campbell. They bring in Darren Waller, who's their de facto number 1 target overall, I would think. But there's definitely room here for somebody to take over for Isaiah Hodgins and Paris Campbell, Darius Slayton. So if the Giants draft somebody, they should be on your fantasy football radar for sure.
A lot of volume, a lot of guys with injury concerns. Slayton, Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson looked really good. In his very small sample size. And, Hodgins, who knows, could be a flash in the pan. So it's like, you look at it like the ceiling's there. Like, if these guys can all stay healthy, they've got a decent wide receiver room, but you're asking a lot out of those guys to stay healthy.
Yeah, this is a team that needs to draft a receiver, because this is a team that doesn't have Patrick Mahomes at quarterback and cannot just turn any receiver into, a productive guy. And granted, I guess I'll give DJ some credit because he did turn Isaiah Hodgins into something relevant last year, but that's just not a sustainable model for an entire season. So they got to get somebody to help DJ out wherever that may be. Next up, I've got the Green Bay Packers. Mentioned last week how I think the tight end is kind of a bigger priority, and we'll talk about that in a second. But receiver, look, there's definitely plenty of room here for fantasy production and for a connection with new quarterback Jordan Love, because I think Christian Watson's probably the only receiver that's entrenched as a starter there. Romeo Doubs is the other one right now, but there's plenty of room there for a big-name receiver to jump in and be immediately relevant with a rookie quarterback who needs weapons.
I was appalled by their depth chart. Like, I don't...
It's gross.
Those two, Samario Torre, Jeff Cotton, and Bo Melton. Who the fuck are those guys?
My favorite meme from last year, fuck it, Samori Toure down there somewhere. Or no, it was actually our friend Gary, who's in our fantasy league, close friend of ours, big Packer fan. He sent us a tweet. It was like, Samori Toure just caught a touchdown, which is going to convince the Packers front office they don't need another receiver for the next 4 years. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of how they operate, it seems like.
Looking at these other teams on this list, it's like, oh yeah, these they're mid, but it's like, okay, like they've got, it's like a gross but doable wide receiver room.
Yeah.
But this one, I was just like, what the hell?
This is a matter of, like, these guys were managed to be kept productive with Aaron Rodgers at the helm last year. You're moving to a basically rookie quarterback with Jordan Love, and you're going to need to get him something other than Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs.
How pissed is Rodgers going to be if they use a first-round pick on a wide receiver?
Oh, it would be beautiful. Pat, I'll do you one better. I hope they trade up and get JSN. I just want Rodgers to have to sit back and watch that just to see the reaction, because that would be beautiful. The next and final spot I have here is the Houston Texans, and this is purely from a volume perspective. Their wide receiver 1 right now is Robert Woods. Whoever they draft and whoever they have under center next year, there's going to be opportunity here. Now, is it a slam dunk opportunity? Absolutely not. We've seen Nico Collins flounder there. Obviously, Brandon Cooks was still there, but Nico Collins was a guy who was, drafted and expected to be maybe productive as a young guy, and just wasn't because the rest of the team was so dysfunctional. But I think they are slowly getting more functional, and if they do end up with a quarterback and a receiver, that will be helpful for whichever receiver lands there. No matter who it is, though, they should have a decent path to volume.
Like I said, barring a trade up, Jackson Smith and Jigba at 12 seems like a really good landing spot. And I think we're all hoping for some John Mechie contributions with maybe absolutely. This year. I don't know, but hopefully we see, because he was another guy who had pretty decent draft capital. So, but like I said, I almost want to stamp Robinson to the Eagles. I want to stamp JSN to the Texans.
They've got the Patrick Gustafson guarantee. Mark it down.
The guarantee. So, congrats, Patriots fans. He's
The Gustafson guarantee has Bijan Robinson to the Eagles and JSN to the Texans. Throw your mortgage on it. Can't possibly backfire. All right, next we'll move on to tight ends to finish it off. We got the best tight end landing spots for fantasy. Again, Pat, the Green Bay Packers. Same reasoning, exactly same reasoning. They need weapons to help out Jordan Love, and whoever goes there can immediately be a top 2 target on that team, which, as I actually want to throw in this little nugget here, I'll mention this probably a few times leading up to fantasy season. A good pal of mine on Twitter, Coupe Fiasco, Andrew Cooper, he does this whole tight end breakdown, and his whole thing about finding a potential top 5 tight end, kind of in the weeds. The requirements for being a top 5 fantasy tight end are you have to be a top 2 target on your team. That's one of the main ones. And so if you can get a guy that is that as a rookie, you could be looking at diamond in the rough here, especially with Jordan Love at quarterback. You never know who he's going to mesh with. So if the Packers draft a tight end, here, watch out.
There are 2 really fantastic guys who could go right there in Mayer and I'm doing this again where I forget the guy's
Kincaid?
name. Yes, Dalton Kincaid. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so see if Mayer, Kincaid, or even Darnell Washington end up in Green Bay, because I will be having my eyes on them as a late fantasy pick for sure, with very high upside given just the barren depth chart that the Packers have on offense other than Aaron Jones at running back. The next spot I have is the Lions. The Lions are a team that, the upside for fantasy might be limited with a tight end that goes here, but it's just the fact that Brock Wright is the starter, so there's definitely room to be the starting tight end on this team. It's going to be hard to fight for targets with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams, but there's still a spot at tight end in a good offense here, so I felt it wrong not to mention it.
Definitely.
Next, I've got the Indianapolis Colts. Look, Pat, I know you and I love us some Mo Alley Cox, but at the end of the day, this is also a guy whose job I think can be jumped whenever.
Well, I'm going to say I love Jelani Woods personally.
That's fair, yeah.
Honestly, if all these teams you listed, if I'm going to disagree with one, Kyle Granson was a guy who they used some decent capital on, but Jelani Woods had a few games last year. He had a game where he caught 2 touchdowns. He had a game where he had 9 catches for 90 yards, and I picked him up in every fantasy league that I needed a touchdown, and it turned to nothing. Yeah. But you look at obviously the big talk is about Chiggy in Tennessee.
Okonkwo, the breakout of the summer.
That's exactly, but I'm looking at Jelani Woods as almost like the light version of that, like the late round tight end flyer.
Yeah. No, I feel you there. Jelani Woods, 3rd round pick last season, did have some definite bright spots, and I think the only way that the Colts tight end spot becomes a rookie enters that spot, becomes fantasy relevant, is if it is a guy that gets taken in the 1st round or early 2nd, because otherwise we talk about draft capital 3rd. That's not a low-end investment on a guy. 73rd overall pick is pretty high up, so they may have some hopes for Jelani Woods. Okay. Just a matter of if they added somebody to that room, but you're right, they very well may not. After that, I've got the Miami Dolphins. We talked about this last week, and similar to the Lions situation where it's they've got great receivers, so you might be fighting a little bit for targets, and it's they had a good receiving tight end in Mike Gesicki, and they didn't use him because they had so many good options just at receiver. But look, maybe a new face, a new name in there gets, different treatment and can provide some different things to this team. It's just you look at Durham Smythe as the starter and, in an offense that's going to be very productive, it's hard not to see just a gap there and potential for production. And then finally, the Dallas Cowboys. This is a team I talked last week about how I personally hope they don't draft a tight end because I think Jake Ferguson and or Peyton Hendershot can be productive players there. But we just know that it's a team that loves to use their tight end. They used Dalton Schultz like crazy last year and then used Ferguson and Hendershot like crazy when Schultz was out. So if they were to invest in a tight end, that's a guy that you should have your eye on. I'm not saying it's a need that the Cowboys have, but just if they take one, have your eyes a little bit wide.
Yeah, on paper, it doesn't have the glamour of
right.
But I think it could work football wise.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, we will end the show with our viewer questions as we always do. First and foremost, we've got an interesting one that we've touched on a little bit here. What should the Texans do on draft night? This is from Mason Mo 37. What should they do is a good question because honestly, Pat, we've talked about all the options that they have. You're locking in JSN at 12, so we know that part of it. But as far as the number 2 overall pick, do you think, let's assume Stroud is not an option, and maybe that's a bad assumption, but let's assume Stroud is not an option. Do you stand pat and take Richardson, Levis, a defensive player, or do you trade back? What would you do here?
I trade back. in that situation where you're talking not even more so that like I don't believe in Richardson or Levis as a number 2 pick, but just what you are going to get for that pick. Even say it's the Colts and you just move back to 4, you still may very well get the same guy that you want at 2, plus a ton of other stuff, plus the 12th pick. So I think if you don't have, like, if Young is gone and Stroud is not your guy for whatever reason, I do not think they should pick there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think a team that's already sitting there with 2 first-round picks and could potentially end up with 3 via the trade, it makes all the sense in the world. And a team that just has so many needs, it's like you might as well, because I don't think Levis or Richardson is worth number 2 either.
No,
and if they can get them, they can get them back end of the top 10 or after that, or even at number 12, and you take your other pick and use it at something else. I think that's the move there. So we will see what the Texans' fate is. And this one, our only non-football related topic of the day, guys. Look, I know NBA playoffs are popping. There's a bunch of injuries everywhere, but look, football is just ultimately the priority here. But this question: is it reasonable to think Denver versus Boston in the finals for both the NBA and the NHL? I think it's more than reasonable, and I'm thrilled to say that as I sit here in the heart of Denver in my apartment, but I don't see why it couldn't be Nuggets, Celtics, and Avalanche, Bruins.
As a man who just looked up the NHL standings right now and discovered the Avalanche are the best team in one of the best teams in the Western Conference. What do they even call it? The Western Yeah, I don't even know what they call it.
This is not a hockey podcast. We don't ever claim
in
to
New
be
England,
one.
I know the Bruins are very good. I'm not a Bruins fan, so I feel like that's been the whole expectations for them to win. But knowing NBA, sure, especially if Giannis is hampered a bit. I think the Celtics may be the favorite anyway, but certainly without Giannis, they are the favorites. The Nuggets, I think it just depends. Like, you're talking about how like the 2 and the 3 seed are already down a game, the Grizzlies and then the Kings, but like, the Kings won. I'm sorry, but
the Kings did win. Yep,
the Kings did win, but like, those are the teams you want advancing, in my opinion. You don't want the Lakers, you don't want the Warriors, you don't want the Suns. Those are the teams you don't want.
No, the West has been a mishmash so far.
As a man who knows nothing about hockey, I'd say it's more likely in hockey.
That's fair. So the Bruins, I know, had like a record-setting season, like most wins in franchise or NHL history, or both, something along those lines. And then the Avs are a team that won the Cup last year. They're the 3rd seed in the Western Conference right now, and they are a team that I know, this just from being around here, has been very injured for most of the season. So I don't know if they're getting these guys back. I don't know what their health status is, but if they can get back to fully healthy, no reason that they can't end up back in the finals against the Bruins or another team. And then in the NBA, look, all I'm going to say is Nuggets game 1 against the Timberwolves showed everybody why they are the number 1 seed in the West. It's a team that has been coasting for a few weeks because they knew their seed was borderline locked in. The starters have barely played, and it was really nice to see that did not lead to really any rust. Jokic played well. Jamal Murray came on in the second half, and it was just a drubbing of the Timberwolves. And I talked shit about the Timberwolves last week because I think they are just a disaster of a franchise as well. Chemistry there is terrible. Kyle Anderson tried to start a fight with Christian Brown, of all people, last night. It's like, what did that dude ever do to you? You are just frustrated because you're losing by 30. Like, I'd be frustrated if I was losing by 32, but don't fight the rookie off the bench like you weirdo. So I
would not be surprised at all if this ends in a sweep. Honestly,
if
it didn't. Honestly, which means the Timberwolves are winning tonight or whenever they play next. So
yeah. So, and in the West, look, the Clippers took game 1 from the Suns. Truthfully, the Suns are the team I'm the most afraid of in the West. I think if the Suns can get bounced, I feel pretty good about the Nuggets' chances, health permitting, to get to the finals and face maybe the Celtics. So Denver-Boston could be a big rivalry here in the next few weeks and months. So good question there. I like that one. All right, guys. That will do it here for this podcast. Keep it locked here. Next week, we will be live again, talking to you guys about whatever you want to talk about. Mostly football, but, some other stuff too. So for Pat Gustafson, I'm Brandon Carney, and we will see you guys next week.